10 albums by supergroups that absolutely rock. This is a fascinating discussion that I'm excited to dive into on this episode of Talking About Records. My name is G.I. Sanders from NTX Vinyl, a small chain of independent record shops in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. If you're not local but you're inside the US, you can shop online at ntxvinyl.com. Would appreciate it if you subscribe here on YouTube, follow us on social media, primarily Facebook and Instagram. So let's talk about supergroups. These albums fascinate me, not only because of the music, but because of the stories behind them and how they formed. You've got a contingency of musicians who at some point get bored with their primary focus or their primary group, and they branch out and they collaborate with other musicians. And in some cases, those musicians also have very popular bands, and that's how a quote-unquote supergroup is formed. So that's really the only criteria that, for me, I was trying to keep in mind is, well, how do you define a supergroup? For me, it's kind of like, hey, if you've got a musician and he's in a well-established and somewhat popular band, then I think he's got the opportunity, that person or persons, to join up with other people in similar level of popular bands, right? So I'm not looking for obscure musicians who have joined up with other obscure musicians, because in my opinion, that's not really a supergroup. I think you've got to get to a level of popularity on some level, define popularity however you'd like. But for me, again, I was looking at well-established artists who were collaborating with other well-established artists and formed an actual entity that produced an actual album. So there you go. That's my definition of a supergroup. I'm going to run down a list of 10 albums in my collection that I really love, that I think fit that bill. So let's start with number one. This album came out in 2009 from the likes of Dave Grohl, Josh Homme, and John Paul Jones. This is Them Crooked Vultures. It is the standalone release from the band. As I mentioned, an incredible lineup of musicians that I think create such a complement for each other. You've got Dave Grohl back behind the drum kit for the first time on an actual project that he was a part of. He recorded drums on a lot of albums as far as being a studio musician, but as far as being an actual band, which this was, per their press and everything that they did, they really did present this as a real band and not as a one-off album. But again, so the first time Grohl was back on drums since Nirvana, honestly, in a full-time project. And then you've got Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age, obviously. An incredible talent from a songwriting perspective, from a voice, from a guitar playing perspective. And then you have John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin on bass, which is just a phenomenal thing. So this album is really special. I think for a one-off record, it really, really delivers in a big way. If you like any of those bands mentioned, Queens of the Stone Age, obviously Led Zeppelin, and you've got, Dave and Foo Fighters, like, it's a perfect mix of all of those. A lot of heavy groove, which is Grohl and John Paul Jones, obviously. Josh Homme takes the lead on all the vocals, and I think the majority of the songwriting was collaborative. But just a really special record. Again, it was a one-off. They didn't go on to do anything more. It's a hard vinyl record to come by these days. Hopefully it'll get a reissue, but this is a little bit of an outlier in this list. I think I've got some more obvious ones on this list, but Them Crooked Vultures is definitely one of those that I thought of immediately when you say the word supergroup, because when you've got guys in bands like Queens and Foos and obviously Led Zeppelin, that definitely commands kind of supergroup status. And so Them Crooked Vultures is a phenomenal album. I would encourage you to check it out if you're not familiar. All right, next on the list. This is a cool one from 2004. Velvet Revolver. This is Scott Weiland from Stone Temple Pilots, and then you've got Slash, Duff, and Matt Sorum from Guns N' Roses. The definition of a supergroup right there. You've got two bands that were hugely popular throughout the 80s and 90s. Very iconic alternative or hard rock bands, obviously. And then they joined forces. And this is a really great record, honestly, really great. Honestly, I put Them Crooked Vultures and this one back to back right up front because I think there's a lot of similarities in regards to the amount of groove and in regards to the kind of style of music. A lot of crossover, a lot of just really heavy, straightforward rock songs, which is what I love about both of these records. I was lucky enough to see Velvet Revolver on this tour when they came through Dallas, the House of Blues. Really powerful at that time. They did go on to record a second album, and then kind of disbanded after that. Scott Weiland went back to Stone Temple Pilots, and obviously Duff and Slash went back and started doing the GNR thing again. So it was short-lived. They were around for a few years. Again, they did tour, but again, just another great kind of, in my mind, one-off. Again, they did do the second album, but I think this was definitely the bigger deal when this one came out. It's a great record through and through. The singles were Slither, which was a great song. Sucker Train Blues was great. And then they had, what was the kind of ballad? Fall to Pieces, great song as well. So again, another kind of somewhat undiscovered, somewhat under the radar supergroup, if you will, just because it was short-lived, but certainly has the star power. So check out Velvet Revolver if you're not familiar. That's Contraband. All right, next on the list, number 3. This one is definitely one that is not under the radar. This is a bona fide supergroup, and that is Deja Vu by Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young. Came out in 1970. Crosby, Stills, and Nash had put out their debut record. They brought Neil Young in to help out with guitar parts from a live standpoint. Famously, their first gig being Woodstock in 1969, where Neil didn't really want to be on camera, so he's not really seen if you watch the videos of those very much. But as they got further into the band, if you will, Neil was invited to actually join as a part of this. He contributed heavily to this record. Just in my opinion, one of those classic albums that everyone should own, everyone should know. The songwriting is spectacular. What they brought to the table in regards to their version of Joni Mitchell's Woodstock, and just the entire track list of Deja Vu is just phenomenal. The band was kind of infamously at odds with each other and with themselves personally. There was a lot of turmoil going on within the group, and a lot of this was recorded separately, and they brought in tracks, especially from Neil's standpoint. But it comes together and it stands the test of time. And I don't think you can say anything negative about calling this a supergroup, because it truly was. You had guys, each one of them coming from their own entities, whether it was from the Byrds or Buffalo Springfield or the Hollies, and then it's just everyone involved in this. Had star power at that time coming out of that scene. And so Deja Vu is a must own, in my opinion, and a classic album through and through. So that's number 3 on the list. Number 4 on the list came out a little before that, 1967. Let's talk about Disraeli Gears by Cream. This is a phenomenal record featuring Jack Bruce, Clapton, and Ginger Baker. Just a who's who of musicians at that time, guys who went on to do other projects, which we'll talk about, obviously having solo careers. And it featured, Strange Brew, Sunshine of Your Love, Tales of Brave Ulysses, We're Going Wrong, Outside Woman Blues. Just a phenomenal record. Love the iconic artwork. It was a really great mesh of blues and psychedelic rock, which I love. And I think the cover being as developed as it is and as intricate as it is, it's just such a beautiful piece of art. And I think, again, is one of those kind of iconic albums in my mind, especially because of the visual and because of those huge singles they had on this record. It was, a time that if I could position myself back in one time of music, the early 90s would be one of them, because that's, kind of where I'm from. But that late 60s period in London, when you had bands in like Cream and obviously like the Stones and the Beatles and all of those all interacting, and Jimi Hendrix being over there, that time period is just fascinating to me, and this is one of those albums that kind of emerged out of it, again being a great combination of blues and psychedelic rock. So I love this record and think it really stands the test of time. All right, you can't, in my mind, mention supergroups and go down the path of Cream without talking about this record, which is Blind Faith. This is the U.S. version, and then we've got the original cover back here, which I'll cover up to not get censored. But Blind Faith with Eric Clapton, Steve Winwood, Ginger Baker, and Rick Gretsch, just a phenomenal record. It was a one-off. Can't Find My Way Home, Presence of the Lord, just beautiful songs across the board. Do What You Like, Sea of Joy. It was short-lived. They did, I believe, just one tour as Blind Faith, and by the end of that tour, it had pretty much decimated in regards to them wanting to be a band. So truly a short-lived supergroup, but a ton of star power. And all of the members, Clapton, Steve Winwood especially, as they've continued to tour, year after year, have featured songs from this record in their live sets and rehash them because they are that good and they do stand out. And so Blind Faith, again, is one of those, along with Israel Gears and along with Deja Vu. Honestly, they're just from that time period, late 60s, which are, hate to keep using the word iconic, but I can't think of a better word to describe certain albums like this, and especially as it pertains to, incredible musicians coming together and collaborating on singular records. So Blind Faith is an absolute standout, and again, a must-have in any record collection, in my opinion. All right, number 6. Let's go back a little more modern, and this is one I talk about often, so it's no surprise, and this is Temple of the Dog from 1991. The short version of the story is that Andrew Wood, who was the lead vocalist from the band Mother Love Bone, passed away, and Chris Cornell, who was his roommate and one of his good friends at that time, wrote a couple of tracks in tribute to Andrew Wood. Those would be the 2 lead-off tracks, which are Say Hello to Heaven and Reach Down. As a kind of sign of healing, he went to Stone Gossard and Jeff Ament, who were members of Mother Love Bone, with Andy Wood, who had passed away, and said, hey, would you like to record on these songs in tribute to Andy? It then snowballed into an entire album. They brought in Mike McCready, who had just joined up with them to start forming Pearl Jam, and then Eddie Vedder was in town actually kind of auditioning for Pearl Jam when they started recording this. So it was a beautiful tribute to Andrew Wood. It is one of the most powerful records to come out of the early 90s, kind of Northwest Seattle grunge scene, if you will. A year after this was released is when Pearl Jam 10 and when Bad Motorfinger from Soundgarden really got popular, and the entire scene exploded. And that's when they went and recorded a video for the song Hunger Strike, and it took, it really caught fire on MTV, and they got a lot of exposure for this album then. But it was a little underground as far as when it was initially released. I didn't know about it until, really Pearl Jam and Soundgarden broke, especially Pearl Jam, in the post Nevermind period of the late 91, 92, right? But it stands as one of the most loved albums from me personally, and I know a lot of people really appreciate this record. Amazing stories behind it, and just again, because of the circumstance, I think it really does hold a special place for a lot of people, and certainly a supergroup when you've got Chris Cornell and Matt Cameron at the time from Soundgarden, along with the members of Pearl Jam, and then obviously Matt Cameron ends up joining Pearl Jam, and he's been in that band even longer than he was in Soundgarden at this stage. So a great story and a great record from some amazing musicians. All right, next on the list, I kind of kept this one similar in the vein of Chris Cornell, and that is Audioslave. So this came out in 2002. Chris Cornell, being the amazing musician he is, he decides to join forces. So Soundgarden disbands. He has a little bit of a solo period where he recorded a solo record, and then Rage Against the Machine breaks up, and he says, you know what, maybe it'd be a good idea to partner with those guys. So you've got Chris Cornell lead vocals, and you've got the rhythm section and obviously guitar of Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, collaborating on, in my opinion, one of the most powerful records to come out of the early 2000s from a rock standpoint. This came out in 2002. I saw the band several times on this tour and subsequent tours. They went on to release 2 more albums, but I think this is definitely the crowning jewel of the Audioslave catalog. The opening track, Cochise, If you look up the video for it, is pretty jaw-dropping and amazing. And I think for a band to come out of the gate with as much hype as they did have, because obviously a lot of people who knew Soundgarden and knew Cornell and knew Rage Against the Machine heard that this was coming. And then you come out of the gate with Cochise, which was a phenomenal opening track, one of the heavier tracks on the record. It was just an eye-opener. But then you've got Gasoline and Like a Stone, Set It Off, I Am the Highway. So you've got kind of ballads, you've got really heavy riff-oriented rock on this. And again, just to me, a really, really solid rock album from the early 2000s that stands the test of time, holds up really well, great listen to this day. All right, let's go on down the path. We're gonna go back to 95, another record that I talk about often because I love it so much. It's hard to mention Supergroups to me without talking about Mad Season's record Above. This was, again, another one-off record. This was Lane Staley from Alice in Chains, Mike McCready from Pearl Jam, Barrett Martin from Screaming Trees, John Baker Saunders as well. Just a beautiful record. They went and recorded this very quickly in between when Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam and Screaming Trees were all on break. So it was a legitimate through and through side project, if you will. They talked about, revisiting it even, early on after this record had come out, and they had done a few shows, but it just didn't happen. And then Lane ended up spiraling out of control and eventually passing away. So no future album came out, unfortunately, only some B-sides and outtakes on an anniversary issue, but just a phenomenal record. Such a vibe on this. Really amazing, soft spoken songs like Wake Up and River of Deceit, but then heavy hitting stuff like Lifeless Dead, I'm Above, I Don't Know Anything. Just great riffs, great kind of blues influenced alternative rock is the way I think about it, with a little bit of kind of jazz influence. Honestly, there's some horns, some percussion. It's just a really unique and eclectic record, and I think it really, again, stands the test of time, kind of similar to what I was saying about Audioslave. It's a great listen, just as good a listen as it was today as it was in 1995, in my opinion. Super strong effort and an amazing supergroup, another one-off. So that's Mad Season. Next on the list, this is probably the most obscure one on this list. I've only got two left, and I would hold it up, but it doesn't exist on vinyl, and I don't even think I own the CD. In 2006, an album called Army of Anyone came out, self-titled record by the band, and it consisted of Richard Patrick from Filter, as well as Dean and Robert DeLeo from Stone Temple Pilots. So we got those guys on here again, or the name Stone Temple Pilots on here again, and then Ray Luzier from Korn was on drums, who ended up going on to be into Korn. This was produced by Bob Ezrin, who famously, worked with Pink Floyd and Aerosmith and all kinds of bands, and it was mixed by Ken Andrews from Failure. So check out Army of Anyone. It's a really solid record. There was a couple singles from it, but it didn't do a lot, and that's why it was kind of undiscovered. And because it came out in 2006, it was the heyday of the CD, and no one was producing vinyl for the most part. So it never made it to vinyl. Maybe one day someone will revive it. It's a great, hard-hitting record. I would put it right in the same vein as kind of Audioslave and those types of heavy rock records that were coming out in the mid-2000s. I remember, spinning listening to this along with Audioslave and Queens of the Stone Age and Foo Fighters and all those bands that were doing a lot of that were producing a lot of really great rock records in the mid-2000s. So Army of Anyone, again, is another one that kind of the outlier on the list, but definitely a supergroup, because you got guys coming from Filter, very, very established, popular band, and obviously Stone Temple Pilots, and then Korn. So it's just a great heavy rock record. I would encourage you to check it out, and hopefully I can hold it one day if anyone ever puts it out on vinyl, which would be great. So last but not least, if you're going to talk about supergroups, you can't really go that route without talking about, in my opinion, the ultimate supergroup. How do you look past the Traveling Wilburys? You've got Bob Dylan, George Harrison, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne from ELO. Just a fantastic album. This is one of those where it fascinates me in regards to watching. Luckily, there were cameras rolling during all this. There's so much footage from the recording of this album and the subsequent record. It just fascinates me to see these guys in the same room interacting as friends, writing music for no better reason, just because they were bored and they wanted to collaborate and they wanted to just be around each other and make music and have fun, right? And that's the beauty of it to me, and that's why I love this record. You've got So much star power on this, and I think in a lot of ways this record was attributed to kind of reviving Dylan's career a little bit at this phase, certainly reviving Petty's career a little bit. Just a really great example of friends collaborating and songwriting together. The big single was handled with care, but the whole thing is great. Honestly, you've got End of the Line kind of finishes off, and it's just seeing Roy Orbison perform, not long before he passed away, and seeing the collaboration of these guys, regardless of how famous they were and how established they all were individually as musicians and as songwriters, seeing them come together and work on something as cool as this album. And it had a shtick behind it where they didn't put their real names on it. They acted like they were all like brothers as a part of a family called the Wilburys. And, just again, so much cool footage exists from this and the recording of it and the release. And it was absolutely one that I had to put on this list. If you talk about supergroups, I love the artwork with the guitars and everything. So just a really special album in a lot of ways. So there you go. 10 albums from supergroups that rock. You've got Them Crooked Vultures, Velvet Revolver, Deja Vu from CSNY, Disraeli Gears from Cream, Blind Faith, self-titled record, Temple of the Dog, Audioslave, Mad Season Above, Army of Anyone, and the Traveling Wilburys. So that's my list. I would love for you to contribute. Let me know what supergroups I missed. There are a lot out there. I just try to pick ones that I have an appreciation for, and obviously I have in my collection, minus one that doesn't exist on vinyl. So thanks as always for watching. These are really fun for me to shoot. I love talking about the music, and I love kind of revisiting these albums each time I do one of these lists. So I really appreciate it. As always, stick around the channel. I'll pop up some other videos, and we'll be back soon with another episode of Talking About Records.